I have with me in the studio a good friend of mine, Heather Kemp. Heather is the Secretary of Southern Highlands Landcare Network. I'm a member of Southern Highlands Landcare Network. I've been a member for not all that long, but I've really been enjoying their activities, and we're going to learn quite a lot more about the network today. So Heather, tell me for a start, how long has Southern Highlands Landcare Network existed in the Highlands?
Wow, it's been around for quite a long time. Southern Highlands Landcare started probably formally in 1993 with the formation of the Mount Gibraltar Landcare and Bush Care Group. That group's still going after all these years, being led by Jane Lemon, who's been doing that all that time.
Wow.
And it aims to help manage, control and care for the Mount Gibraltar Heritage Reserve. But that being said, Ian Royds was part of setting up River Care, and that started in 1989. And Moss Vale also had a landcare group start around 2000. The group at Moss Vale worked for about 20 years, and it started at the golf club and worked down along White Creek to Cosgrove Park. I started there actually in 2018, but by then it was being run by the council. Those groups came out of something called reserve committees. And those reserve committees, they were all over the Shire. So some of those are now landcare groups. So one of them was the Currabunda Wetlands at Bundanoon, the Glowworm Track at Bundanoon, Penrose Conservation Group, which is still working now in the swamps, Indigo Creek, the Bowral Urban Landcare Group, which worked along Mittagong Creek here in Bowral, and a youth landcare group which did some planting along the Wingecarribee River. So it's been around a long time. What happened was during that sort of late part of 2010s and into the teens, a number of those groups came under council control, not because of any problems with the group, it's just the governance and the insurance and small groups working independently and working on public land. The council needed to take over, and that's the history of the bush care groups that we have in the area being run by council. So in the teens, the 20-teens, a group of people got together to form the network that is the Southern Highlands Landcare Network now. And the reason they did that was that all the work that had been happening on private land had ceased because those bush care groups had come under council and they were only allowed to work on public land. And where that's really important is along the river. So the river is all, well, don't quote me, but I think most of that's privately owned. So the Wingecarribee River is very important to us because it feeds into the Sydney water catchment and water qualities very well. So the network started working along there, and that was all about improving water quality. We've been working there for over 20 years now, and restoring the riverbanks and the habitat corridors along that riverbank. Then once we came out of the COVID lockdowns, the Landcare Network expanded, and we've expanded into working with Land for Wildlife properties and other groups like Rotary Adopt a Tree, Greening Australia. We've been working with the Greater Eastern Ranges Initiative for a very long time, on and off when there's been funding there. And we've recently, in the last few years, developed another site, which is the Berrima Reserve, where you work. So that's... I hope I haven't forgotten anything that's going to but that's just a general overview of how we've got to today. So that's where we've been working. Right.
And so I know about the activities at Berrima at the Wildlife Reserve, and I also sometimes volunteer at Cosgrove Park in Moss Vale. What other things do the Southern Highlands Landcare Network do?
That gives it a formal title. So the Southern Highlands Landcare Network, it's quite a concept, really. We're really about supporting stewardship of the environment. So that isn't limited to one area or another. I mean, the river has been our focus, and the riparian zones. So riparian zone is that crucial area between the water and the bushland, and that's quite a biodiversity hotspot. Obviously, we know that platypus and things like that use those areas, but lots of animals, that's a very important area. And if we can establish riparian zones or areas along a river, we create conductivity corridors where animals can move, which, as you know, is so important for biodiversity and keeping breeding groups viable. So, riparian zones, the bush, private land. Our reserve at Berrima is on Crown land. So we have that general sort of overview of stewardship. But because it's about stewardship, it gives us a very diverse range of things that we look at. And we're very fortunate that we have quite a reasonable sized committee with a diverse range of interests and quite a great skill set. So that's led us into lots of different areas. So my thing is about revegetation and managing revegetation projects, which we don't often do on our own. We're often working with other groups, hence the network in our name. So we often work with council or Glossies in the Mist, who you're familiar with, Land for Wildlife, Greening Australia, various other organisations we've worked with. And those revegetation projects are on private land. So one of our big challenges is connecting with private landholders who are interested in revegetation projects. And once we've been involved in those revegetation projects, we've got people with a great deal of experience and knowledge of local flora and fauna, so we like to be involved in plant choices and how the planting's conducted, but most importantly also on the maintenance to make sure these things actually survive, because there's lots of plantings go on and people go, oh, I got 1,400 trees in, but if they're not planted well, if they're wrong species, they're too close, they're in flood zones, whatever it is, are they all going to be there in 5 years?
So I've been with you to plantings where they've just been choked off by weeds that have come up to them.
So along with that, though, we come back to our groups that we work at Berrima and on Mount Gibraltar, is working against invasive weeds. Some people think that we chop out too many things. We hear that sort of thing from time to time, but what we're trying to do is release the plants that are there that meant to be there, that are going to feed the insects that the birds eat and so forth. You've talked in your podcast about Jen's idea of releasing plants, and that's a wonderful thing to be able to do, to cut down some blackberry and see all these tiny little seedlings of acacia or whatever coming up. But the other aspect of that stewardship is also education, and we've been fortunate to have people in our group with great promotional skills who have been able to run very successful education events, and supporting other groups too is something that we hope to do that comes on from time to time.
So what achievement of your group are you most proud of?
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer because I'm proud of a lot of things we've done. Working along the river, I'm very proud of what has happened, well, since I've been involved, but I've lived here for 34 years and I can remember the river work even when my children were little. But over the last couple of years, finishing up in 2023, there were huge plantings along Wingecarribee River that were led by Ian Royds, and I was involved in promoting those. And it was marvellous to get there and see 50 volunteers and people coming up from Sydney. So that was great. But I think the thing I'm personally proud of is actually when I can help out landholders, when you've got a couple or an individual who are on a large acreage and they're trying to manage plantings on their own, or they have all these ideas, when we can actually go and do that and you help them and you see how grateful they are and, you know, what a thrill it is that they've made that, you know, like, oh, we've been able to get rid of those blackberries or whatever. That's what makes me proud. It's those little things rather than the big things for me personally.
And it is, you know, it's a privilege for us, isn't it, that private landholders, although they're getting trees onto their land, in many cases they're actually losing pastoral land or something like that. It's actually going to impact on their business. So it's great if we can support them in what they're doing.
Yeah, it is. It's not an easy commitment to make. There's a lot of things that goes into a planting from the landholder's point of view. As you say, they've got to give up land. And I was at a planting out Yassway last year, and the fellow there was saying he allocates 5 years before he can put his animals back on that area of planting, because the trees have to get to a certain size and the shrubs have to be able to cope with some
resilient,
some animal eating them, because they will. And then there's fencing. So one of the things in our particular environment, fencing is a big issue. Like if you want to fence along the river, we strongly encourage that because it keeps the animals out of the river, and the animals bring in a whole lot of mud if they walk down, but obviously they also poop in the river. So some landholders don't want to do that. They want the view, they want the access, and that's perfectly understandable. So often the compromise can be reached. Often we plant in areas that aren't of high value to pastoral concerns, on ridges, or we can help a lot with erosion control. So, but it is a big commitment for the landholder, and we get grants for them, or we work with council, and council are very, very supportive of this type of work. So yeah, but it is a challenge to get people involved because they're looking at it at a bottom line, and I understand perfectly why they hesitate. So we've been very fortunate, the generosity of these people who can see the bigger picture. The biodiversity that they're encouraging helps their production, and it creates shelter belts for animals and so forth. So there are advantages as well.
Yeah. I'd only learnt recently from Lyndall Breen, who's been involved with the group ever since the beginning, I guess.
Oh, definitely. Lyndall has been involved in environmental movement her whole adult life, and on many, many committees. She's always behind the scene doing things. So, yes, and she's got a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, so she told me that the trees in Cosgrove Park along the creek there, Cosgrove Park, everyone, is the park on Berrima Road in Moss Vale. And the trees along the Rip Creek line there were planted really by the originators of Southern Highlands Landcare Network many, many, many years ago. It had been covered in willows, I think, Lyndall told me, and they were cleared out, and so it was just a paddock really with a creek running through the middle, and that planting was done by this group many years ago, and now it looks fantastic.
Well, when it first started there, and I don't recall it, but they started up at the golf course, and the area was pretty much an open drain that whole way through. Everything was being discharged, there was rubbish and so forth. So a lot of big willows, a lot of exotic trees, choked up, no water flow. So yeah, if you're ever walking along there, it's lovely now.
Yes.
It's and the bird life in there, it's terrific. And seeing things like that is really great, because you go, okay, this is where I'm aiming. And the bike track at Oxley, there's so much of that has been revegetated by Ian Royds and his group at Oxley College, and Landcare and Bushcare that has run there. So
it is worthwhile.
But it is, that's quite satisfying.
Yeah. I know the answer to this one, but if I wanted to become a member, how do I join?
Okay, joining Landcare is super easy. It costs you a whole $10 if you want to become a member, and it's simply filling in a form. So we have a website that has our coordinators' details on, or we have a Facebook group that you could join. You can come and be a volunteer without being a member. That's not a criteria.
Yes, we'll have anybody.
Exactly. Anyone to lend us a hand is a big plus.
Should, while we're talking about volunteers as well, we should say that you don't have to be super fit. Many of the volunteers who come are retired people. There's a job for everybody. You're not going to be intimidated by the work, and the more of us there are doing it, the easier the work is.
Yeah, so I would say if you're capable of gardening, particularly planting days, we don't plant large trees. We plant things in tube stock, which are the smallest pots. They're bigger than a seedling punnet, that type of thing, but they're only small pots. And for our jobs, the holes will be dug generally. So it's not like you're digging holes. So you're simply taking something out of a pot and refilling the soil and patting it down, maybe putting a weed mat or tree guard on it. So you're not using a mattock. No. It's not hard yards. With our working bees at Berrima and those sort of things, yes, we're often removing weeds, but it depends on the nature. Up on Mount Gibraltar, they're often sitting on a mat actually hand weeding things like Tradescantia or ivy, and you don't need to be fit for that.
No.
And
you just need to be able to get down to the ground and get back up again.
I would say so. That would be amazing.
So when you say go to the website, is it Southern Highlands Landcare Network website or Landcare?
Look, if you Google Southern Highlands Landcare, it'll come up. It's part of the New South Wales Landcare Gateway, it's called. And even if you get to New South Wales Landcare, on that page there's a link to Southern Highlands Landcare. So it's got a lot of the history. It's got a record of all our different projects that we're working on. Some of the old stuff's had to be archived because of the size of the site. But the main thing for people, if they're interested in Nathan Fraser, is our coordinator. It has his contact details, and he can direct you to the appropriate person if you're interested in bush care work or volunteering in any capacity.
Great. And so what's the very best part about being a member?
The very best part about being a member? Oh, goodness gracious. For me, and I'm sure it varies for people, it's about a sense of purpose. So I feel very strongly about the environment and sustainability, but when I looked around, I was looking for a group that was active and hands-on. And I think that's one of the real main things about Landcare. We do stuff. We just don't talk about it. And sure, we do need to talk about it. Don't get me wrong. We need advocacy groups. They're all great. But I wanted somewhere that could do something. So the best part for me is having a sense of purpose. And it gives me a sense that as an individual I can make a difference. And when we have our working bees and there's a dozen of us, you can look back after 3 hours. And that's another thing in terms of fitness. We're there for a whole 3 hours once or twice a month.
With morning tea.
With morning tea, for half an hour. So we're not talking marathon running.
Strenuous stuff.
No. So I've said it's practical, making a difference. I actually enjoy the physical work, and we get a lot of men along because of that. I like that. The companionship of people who are also interested in the environment is great, and feeling like you're part of a community and you're actually serving the community. I have a strong need for service.
Yeah, look, I agree with all of that. I love being outside and, just chatting with like-minded people and, as you say, looking back at your work and thinking we as a group have achieved something today. And I sleep better.
Oh, definitely. Physical activity, certainly. It's great. Yeah,
it's really good. So everybody listening, do consider joining Southern Highlands Landcare Network. They're a very effective group in the Highlands. I love the time I spend with them, and they're a really friendly, welcoming group. So thank you very much, Heather, for coming in and talking to us about Southern Highlands Landcare Network.
It's a privilege to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Our pleasure.